Welcome back to the Clinical Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Alex Earl. We have a very loaded show for you today. We have a special guest. And before I get into who it is and the content for today, I want to just remind you guys that we created this podcast for clinicians and fitness professionals to learn more about the career journeys of the experts in specific or particular fields. This includes unique practice arrangements, and unusual business opportunities for chiropractors, physical therapists, strength coaches, sport coaches, yoga instructors, wellness professionals, and so forth. Today's episode is a perfect example of how one expert became truly world class at something. We will take a closer look at why he chose this particular skill, what he learned throughout the process. If you can recall some of the past experts we've interviewed, I'm really interested in learning the thought process that went on throughout their journey, not necessarily what they ended up becoming a master at or what they became an expert at, but the thought process behind it. I think there's a lot of gems that we can learn from these experts on the thought process that went into it. And also what our guest does now as a result of this advanced understanding in his own field. He has truly set himself apart from the rest of the providers with his knowledge, and as you're about to hear, he is not one to hold anything back. I say this, that you've been warned. Some of the stories that he discusses and discloses, you might it might rub you the wrong way. Some of it might actually be quite enlightening, and some of it might just be pure entertainment. It's pretty entertaining when he starts sharing some of his stories. He has decades of experience in the field and comes with a wealth of knowledge. But first, before we get into the interview, just a friendly reminder that today's show is sponsored by Midwest Rehabilitation Institute. Midwest Rehabilitation Institute helps chiropractors and physical therapists like you by providing the clarity you are desperately searching for in order to achieve exceptional outcomes with your patients, your clients, and your business. And if you guys would do me this one favor, it would mean the absolute world to me. If you could subscribe to this show on your preferred podcast platform. Subscribers matter now more than ever, believe it or not, even more so than actual listens. So if you could just click the plus button on Apple iTunes, I believe that's just the subscribe to the show. If you could do that, that would be great. Please screenshot and share on your story on social media stories. The number one takeaway from today's episode, the number one takeaway, the number one thought, the number one comment, the number one strategy, just the one thing that you're going to take away and share that on your story. This way we know what type of content is resonating with our listeners, so we can continue to get the right people on our show to deliver highly valuable content. And then tag us in it. So tag us at Midwest Rehab, and we will reshare it. And again, it'll just make sure that we're getting the right people in front of our audience to make sure that the information is useful and useful for them in their business. Sign up. The next thing is sign up for our newsletter, where every Monday you can receive our Midwest Monday email. It's the same structure each week with a little bit of a rant in the beginning by yours truly, followed by a quote I've been pondering lately, and it wraps up nicely with a complete breakdown of all the upcoming events we have, and even links to our most recent podcast episodes like this one. So if you guys could help us out with that, again, that would be greatly appreciated. And as I mentioned, it will help us grow this show and to get this type of valuable content out to other people just like you. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Now let's dive into today's show. Welcome back to the Clinical Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Earl, and I'm joined today by fellow chiropractor, Dr. Gregg Friedman. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to learn from you and your experience and knowledge, and just have a wonderful chat with you today. So thanks for taking time out. I have a lot of questions, all good ones, all good ones. But
You could ask me bad ones too.
yeah, okay, okay. Well, one of the reasons why, and I mentioned this right before we started recording, is that you have this presence online that a lot of people are drawn to because you have this humor, but also this vast knowledge bank, and you just seem to have a way with communicating things that are directly applicable here in 2022 for the modern practice, right? Like you just have a way of distilling complex information, which is a skill, and distilling it down into very practical, useful. And not many people do that. And so I thought, well, this guy's really interesting. He's got a lot to say. I find it very entertaining and helpful. So I'm like, we got to get this guy on the show. So thank you again for coming on, and taking time out of your day. So what we usually start off with is, tell us a little bit of your background, and we have many other conversations to have about business and starting and your history as a chiropractor for many, many years. But let's just start off with, how did you get into chiropractic? When did you first experience chiropractic care? And we'll kind of go from there.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for that introduction. That was nice of you to say all that. So my father was a chiropractor. So my entire life has been in and around chiropractic. So people have asked me over the years, have you always wanted to be a chiropractor? And I say, no, not always, only since I was 5. So from 0 to 4, I hadn't made a decision yet, but from 5 on, so it's literally since I'm 5 years old, I was saying that I wanted to be a chiropractor, and back then I'm sure it was mostly because my father was a chiropractor. I had no idea what he did. But I remember growing up as a kid. Okay, now you and some of your listeners might find this a lot, but growing up as a kid, first of all, I wasn't sick very often at all. But when I wasn't feeling well, or anyone in my family wasn't feeling well, we would get adjusted. That was our first line of defense. And that was almost always all we needed. I mean, I don't remember ever seeing a pediatrician in my life. So my whole life was just kind of like that. And then it wasn't until high school, like between junior and senior year, I had a class. It was an English class. And the teacher assigned us to do a research paper. And the research paper had to be a comparative paper, comparing 2 or more things. So I said, all right, so people were picking random subjects. And I thought at that time, I was starting to question, okay, do I want to be a chiropractor for the right reasons or just because my father's doing it? So I decided to compare. I decided that I was a very good student. So I decided to either go into chiropractic, medicine, or law. Now, this was a long time ago, and there were already too many lawyers. So if you can imagine. So it was between chiropractic and medicine. So I did a comparative paper between chiropractic and medicine as a career. And, at first I looked, I read books and journals and all that, but then I interviewed doctors in practice, and this blew my mind. So this is before managed care. All right. This is when insurance was good for everybody.
Right.
And I interviewed medical doctors. Every single one of them was depressed. They were burnt out, and they were like, Greg, don't do it, man. Don't do it. Medicine's terrible. This is when medicine was good.
Wow.
And, we're on call all the time, and these stupid patients to just call us at 3 a.m. for these stupid, I mean, if it's an emergency, that's fine. But they said, this is, we can't go on vacation if we're on call. And he said, every one of them said, it's just terrible. The money's good, but you can make money anywhere like that. And I was like, wow. So then I interviewed some chiropractors, and that was hysterical because interviewing chiropractors back then was like interviewing a room full of surfers. They were all like, dude, this is awesome. My patients are great. It's so crazy. I love my patients. I love going in every day. I love helping people. And, I don't get these crazy phone calls in the middle of the night like an MD would, and I'm not on call and they don't bug me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it was such a stark difference that it helped because if I hadn't gone into chiropractic for medicine, somebody said, what would you done in medicine? I was interested in neurosurgery. But the quality of life just doesn't match what I want to do. I don't care about the money part with that, but these chiropractors were so funny on how they, and I'm like, wow. And that really kind of tilted me more towards, okay, I'm in the right. So I remember I went to LACC, now Southern California University, whatever. And I had an interview there. And I showed up for the interview, and and I thought, well, first of all, I'm a very good student. Second of all, my father's a chiropractor. This should be easy. I get to the interview, and one of the first questions was, "Are you just doing this because you're a father?"
Wow.
I'm like, no. And then they said, "What makes you think you can even handle this?" I said, it's a pretty rigorous education. I'm like, and then I get all cocky. I'm like, well, yeah, let's talk about that. I said, well, I went through undergrad on a full academic scholarship. And, and I got a degree in business and was pre-med at the same time. I was one of the first in the country to do that. And I just went off on this arrogant tear. And I said, I finished in 4 years. I said, I've been taking 18, 19 hours a semester, every semester. And I was dean's list with that. And they looked at me and they said, well, your first trimester in chiropractic school is 35 hours. I said, what? I said, well, you're counting that differently. No, we're not. Like 35, how? I said, well, you're basically in class from 7 in the morning till 5 in the evening. And then you have labs. I'm like, oh my God. So my arrogance dissipated very, very quickly with that. And then that's kind of what I did.
So back up a step. Did you grow up in California or was
No. So I grew up the first 11 years of my life in New York.
okay.
And then my parents just got completely sick of New York. So they wanted to move somewhere, anywhere. But my mother said, I'll go wherever you want as long as there's no snow. So they narrowed it down to, they thought about California years ago, decided not to. They thought about Arizona and New Mexico. New Mexico gets some snow, so that was out. So they actually came to visit Arizona, and it was in February, and they flew. My father had to shovel snow out of the driveway to drive to the airport, and then they land in Phoenix, and they get off the plane. It was 79 degrees. My mother said, "That's it.
We're moving
Pack
here.
up the kids."
Yeah, yeah.
And so yeah, I've been in Arizona most of my life.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, yeah, so you go through Chiro school and talk a little bit about your journey from after you graduate school, like what step did you take next?
Okay, so I graduated chiropractic college. I did an internship with a very successful chiropractor in Southern California while I was in school. I finished my requirements to graduate, my clinic requirements very quickly. So I was able to work with this chiropractor, and he wanted me to stay with him, but I wanted to work with my dad in Arizona. So came to Arizona. My father hired me as an associate, paid me $300 a week. That's right.
Wow.
It's $1,200 a month.
Yeah.
And I was okay with that because that was, I wasn't planning on staying an associate. And my goal was to match his volume and revenue in 2 years. That was my goal. So how the hell do I do that? So, okay, this is way before internet and computers and all that. So I made up a business card, and I got a box of 1,000 business cards. And since I had no patients yet, I would go door to door to all the businesses around the office every day, introducing myself and giving out my business cards. Now, it's funny because people have looked at me when I tell them that, and they're like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, "Let me tell you something. I'm an outgoing guy. That was weird for me. I mean, that was even difficult for me at first. That was just out there.
Right.
But after the first one, it got a little bit better, and then a little better, and then pretty soon it was easy. I would just go out and a lot of times it's just hey, I'm Greg, I'm a chiropractor, I'm over there in that building. Just want to drop off some cards, and then I'd leave. I don't have to have a conversation. Every now and then they'd engage in a conversation, and I
Right.
would do that. And pretty quickly I ran out of business cards, and then I started doing. One of my goals was that in those 2 years that I could go anywhere in my town and someone will know who I am. So I was single and I was young and I joined everything. I went to Chamber of Commerce stuff. I went to all their things. I joined the JCs, which was a big thing back then, but I engaged. I am vocal and the one time in JCs, I was a new member and I'm trying to think about it. There was a new member. Nobody knew who I was, and they were having a a speech contest for something, 2 minutes. So I got up on top of a table, and I gave my best preacher speech that I could come up with. And at the end of 2 minutes, somebody yelled out, "Who the hell are you?" And that became my journey there. And from there, I joined a Rotary Club and I was president of that. I always engaged in these things. And I always tell new doctors, if you're going to do stuff like that in your community, please, for the love of God, don't do it thinking you're going to get new patients from it because they can sniff that a mile away. There's a certain stank to that.
Right.
The reason I did all that was because I wanted to meet people. I wanted to give back to my community. I could care less if I ever got a new patient from those organizations. I never anticipated it. I did, of course, over the years, but I didn't look for it. You know, I would join a networking group if I wanted business. Those never really worked very well for me, but so I did that and and then I practiced with my father for a while. And sure enough, after a couple of years, I could go anywhere in my town and somebody would know me. One time, I was in San Francisco randomly for like a couple of days vacation, and I'm walking down the street in San Francisco, and I hear, "Hey, Greg," and I thought to myself, "I'm not going to turn around. I mean, how arrogant would that be? I'm in a different state. They're not talking to me. There's
Right.
somebody else named Greg, right?" But I couldn't help it. I turned around. Sure enough, it was somebody that I knew. I thought, wow, I'm, that's going okay. So I knew a lot of people with that. And then I practiced with my father for a number of years, and there was great things about that and not so great things about that.
Yeah. Like what?
The great things was working with my father. The
Yeah,
not so great
exactly.
things was, we had some different ideas about things. I had a business degree also, and most doctors, including chiropractors, are terrible at that. My father, had it. So I looked at the books one time, like, holy fuck, what? I'm sorry, bro. What are you doing?
Yeah.
I said that. Uh, so ran it, and then we had too much of commingling things. I'm like that. So eventually, I got married. My wife had family about 30 minutes from where we were living, where my office was.
Okay.
So, and a lot of her family wanted to see me, but it was too far. So we opened up an office near where her family was, and we just went there 2 evenings a week, Tuesday and Thursday, from
Nice.
4 to 8 p.m. And it was easy. And within less than a year, that part-time office was more profitable than my full-time office. And I thought, what? Now the gross from the full-time office was much higher,
Right. Right.
but the net profit was
Yeah.
higher than, and I'm like, hold up a second. This is where my business degree, I'm like, wait a minute. And now I'm looking, I'm like, holy crap, I'm onto something here. And then I'm like, okay, enough of this. So I started transitioning out of the full-time practice, and I had other people in there for a while. And then I was doing my part-time thing. And then I started traveling. Well, I started traveling, teaching some seminars. And then I had a patient who, here's a funny story. Many years ago, like 30 years ago or so, I became the chiropractor for one of the nicest resorts in Scottsdale, Arizona. I don't know how it happened, but so whenever
Yeah.
and it was
Wow.
a high dollar.
That's an incredible opportunity. So we'll have to come back on how that kind of manifested, but go on.
Yeah,
I
I
want to
don't
hear
know
this.
how it manifested.
Oh, really?
I
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Just one day I started getting phone calls from guests at this hotel, and I found out that the concierge had my name and phone number. So whenever a guest called the concierge to ask for chiropractic, they would call me. So I would do house calls to this hotel every now and then, usually in the winter.
Yeah.
And I met some interesting, very wealthy people. It was, I see them one time,
Yep.
and that was it. And one time I went to a suite, and the woman before, I'm lugging this portable table, and I'm like, I mean, what do I charge?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and this was like 30 years ago. I'm like, I'm not billing insurance for that. I mean, what do I charge? So I get to this woman's room, and she says, "Hey, before we start, I mean, what's your charge?" And I was almost apologetic about it. I said, "Well, $50." And I was waiting for her to go, that's, could you do like 30? Yeah, sure. That's, I said $50. And she said, really? And I'm like, she goes, will you take care of my mother too? I'm like, okay, I need to change my fees.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
too easy. So anyway, some people would come to my office from this hotel.
Okay.
So one day I'm in my office and somebody comes from the hotel, and it's somebody that was about my age, who's like a year younger than me. So we're both about 30 or so at the time. And I'm looking at his paperwork, and he was from California. And I looked at his employer, and his employer is a massively huge company in the sports industry. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, he's probably some marketing scrub making about 20,000 a year. But good for him that he's in Scottsdale, in December for some meeting with them. So they're paying for it. And even back 30 years ago, it was $500 a night for this hotel. So I kind of treated the guy as a peer. Hey, what's up? What's going on? I'm like, hey, how do you like the hotel? It's just stupid stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I took care of him, and that was the end of it. We went back to California. About 3 months later, he comes back to my office, and I'm like, oh, he must have another meeting or something here. And this happens a couple of times. And finally I said, yeah, what are you in town for? Do you have a meeting? He goes, no. I said, what are you here for? He said, to see you. I said, oh yeah, I'm not understanding. I said, let me ask you this way. Where did you just drive from? He said, the airport. I said, when you leave my office, where will you drive? He said, the airport. I said, you flew from California to here to see me, then you're flying back home. He said, yes. I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute, that's not a marketing scrub making
Right.
20. I'm like, who the hell is this guy? And then like days later, there was a press conference on TV, and something big had happened in this particular sport. And they're interviewing on TV, and an older man comes up who had the same last name as this guy. And I'm looking at him like, and it was a CEO. And I'm like, oh, that's funny. He's got the same last name as, oh shit. What? And then they introduced my patient, who was the vice president of this. I'm like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me. And then as it turns out, it was a family owned thing, billionaire.
Right.
And soon after, this patient became CEO of this thing.
Wow.
And he would fly into Phoenix to see me. And then one day I got a call from one of his assistants on the East Coast. Said, hey, he's moving to the East Coast. It's going to be hard for him to get in to see you, but he wants to know if you'll see him. Well, actually what happened was he was in my office, and he told me, he says, hey, I've got an appointment with a spine surgeon at Cedars-Sinai in LA in a couple of months. He said, I'd like you to be there and ask questions and then tell me what you think later. I'm like,
Wow.
all right. I said, I'd be happy to. He said, and of course, I would never think of imposing on our friendship. He said, I trust you, respect you. I said, I'll pay you for your time and expenses. I said, well, you don't have to. And then he looks at me, I'll pay you for your time. And I said, oh.
Yeah.
I said, are you going to send the G5 for me?
Yeah.
He said, no. He said, just book a Southwest flight. I'll reimburse you and I'll pay you for your time. I'm like, all right. So he actually said to me, he said, in fact, let me ask you this. He said, what is a day worth to you?
Wow.
I said, what? He said, I'm going to need you for the day. What's a day worth to you? I'd never been asked that question. I didn't even know how to answer it. I have 8 seconds to come up with an answer.
So what'd you say?
So I'm like, so I'm thinking about, I'm doing math in my head. What is it? So I thought to myself, all right, let's say I had $1 million a year practice, which I didn't, but let's just say that I did.
Yeah.
$1 million a year. And let's say my overhead was about this percentage. So my net was this much a year. And then I reverse engineered. If that's my net for a year, let's see, what is it by month, by week, by day? And I came up with a number. I said, a day is worth about this much. He said, fine, I'll pay you that plus your expenses. I'm like, wait, let me refigure. That was too easy. So anyway, so I did that. I go to California a couple months later, meet with this spine surgeon. And it's this guy, my patient, me, and one of his other employees in this room with a spine surgeon. And this guy is going over, he's showing x-rays, he's talking about a surgery he wanted to do in this patient of mine, going over this stuff. And I just introduced myself. I'm Gregg. I didn't want to get into, I'm a chiropractor. I'm Gregg. All right. So I sit down and I'm listening to this guy. And what he was talking about was just absolutely barbaric. And finally he says, do any of you have any questions? And he was just an arrogant, anybody have any questions? I said, I'm thinking to myself, don't do it. Don't do it. And I feel my hand coming. I'm like, don't do it. Yeah, I have a question. Oh, Gregg, okay, what's your question? I said, that lateral x-ray that you're showing, was that done at 40 or 72 inches? Because if it was done at 40, there's an 18% magnification error rate. And he looked at me and he said, okay, let's pause for a second. I want everyone to reintroduce themselves because that is a question I've never been asked. Who are you? I'm like, so I said, the chiropractor. So he couldn't even answer the question for me. So after that, we're at another location and I'm adjusting this patient of mine. And he says, I feel so good when I see you, but then, I may not see you for a few months and then I get all jacked up again. I said, well, there's chiropractors all over the country. You can see them. He goes, yeah, I know, but you're the only one who's really been able to help me. So I'm like, look, if I could get my hands on you and adjust you on a more regular basis, it might help you. You've got a chronic thing. He said, like, how often? I said, I don't know. Once a week, every couple of weeks, once a month, anything better than what you're doing now. And he goes, well, how do I do that? I'm living on the East Coast. I'm like, I don't know the logistics. I'm just saying that would be an option. So then get home. And then after that, I get a call from his assistant. Hey, he wants to know if you will travel to him. I said, yeah, I'd be happy to. And he'll pay you the same thing he did, for your day and your expenses.
Right.
I said, that's fine. They said, how much time do you need? I said, it depends on where it is in the country. I said, if it's done to California, there's a flight from Phoenix to LA like every hour. So that's easy. Right. But if it's east of Phoenix, I need 24 hours at least to reschedule people and do stuff. So they said, okay, that's fine. So soon after that, he had me come, he had a condo in Santa Monica, California. So he had me fly to Santa Monica, California. So I go out there and I called the driver's service, a limo service, that would pick me up at the airport. I don't want to rent a car from the airport at too much time involved. So I called this driver service and I said, hey, I need a driver to pick me up at LAX, drive me to a location that you cannot discuss with anybody in Santa Monica. I said, you're going to drop me off in front of the place, keep the engine running. I'll get out. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Drive me back to the airport. And the owner of the company was like, is this legit? I'm like, it's not a drug deal, I promise. It's just, so they would pick me up at the airport and in the Lincoln Town car, and they would drive me to this place. They would drop me off, keep the engine running, and I would go in, I would take my table, and eventually I just left my table there.
Right, yeah.
Right? And I would go in there, unfold it. How you doing? Great, lay down. I would adjust them. How's that? Great. All right, see you next time. And I walked out. He had me do that 4 weeks in a row. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the hell? And then he was in Phoenix one time, and I said, dude, I got to talk to you about something. He said, what? I said, when you agreed to pay me what you're paying me, I don't know that you were anticipating like every week. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I said, I mean, if we need to have a different arrangement, I mean, and he said, are you offering me a discount? I'm like, I just don't want to take you for granted. That, and he
Yeah.
says, let me explain something. He said, he said, I fly in here on the Gulf on the G5. It costs me more in landing fees than I pay you.
Really put that in perspective.
So just not even the cost of the fuel or the
That's
pilot,
right.
just the
Just a
landing
landing
fees
fee. Oh my
are more
goodness.
than I pay you. And I'm like, oh, so then what you're telling me is I'm saving you money. He goes, exactly. I said, all right, we're good. So then for the next 10 years, I was traveling for him, usually to his $34 million penthouse apartment in Midtown Manhattan. And with the building and the doorman and the concierge, and
Yep.
they knew who I was, and they would get my table that I kept down there for a minute. And I did that for about 10 years. And I would teach seminars, and I would stop off in New York on the way to go to a seminar that I was speaking at. So one time I saw him first, went to the airport, it rained, I missed a connection. I'm like, I had to get to Des Moines or something with that. I ended up having to fly somewhere, rent a, have a car company pick me up and drive me 7 hours to, I could have flown to Paris for that, but
Right. Right. Yeah.
anyway, so I did that for about 10 years, and that was interesting.
Was the frequency still like that's mind blowing when you think about it that you established this like, this relationship with this guy and the doctor patient relationship was, you know, genuine. And I think that really started off all this. I'm sure you had no idea that it
No
would
idea.
manifest into a 10-year,
Yeah.
doctor patient interaction. So did the frequency change? Was it for 10 years? It was once a week? It was it?
No, it was about twice a month for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Twice a month. So it was, so people have asked me, how do I go about, I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
this was a fluke.
Yeah,
I
you
said,
can't
this is
market for that. You can't set
now,
out and try to find these people. That happens organically. A couple of the
yeah,
opportunities
it was
I've had are totally same boat where it was just
yeah,
you know someone who knows someone and then the conversation starts and it goes from there. But it's not something that you just create a website
no,
for people, CEOs of major corporations to find you.
right.
That's not
It was
reality.
complete fluke. So that was an interesting time for sure.
Oh
I would
yeah.
be on a flight, I'd be flying first class, and somebody would say, hey, what are you going to New York for? I'm like, I'm going to see a patient. I was on the elevator. The company was coming down from his penthouse, and there's an old guy in the elevator I just remember an old guy with a small dog wearing a sweater. The dog had a sweater, and I had my portable table in the elevator with me. And the guy said, "Oh, are you a trainer?" I said, "No." He said, what were you doing here? I'm like, well, I'm a chiropractor, and I come and see somebody who lives upstairs a couple times a month or so. And he says, where's your office? I said, Phoenix, Arizona. And he said, you fly here? So now this is a building, by the way, that Jay-Z and Beyonce lived in also. So this is a very expensive. So everyone who lives in this building was very, very wealthy. So
Right.
this guy said, and you fly here to do that? I said, yeah. He looked at me and he goes, do you have a business card? And I'm like, oh, damn. I, I I don't, but wouldn't that have been cool to have a second person that
That's right. That's right. Oh man. So
that was
Ho
crazy.
how did you go? I mean, I could listen to your stories for hours, I think, and maybe we will. We don't have a time limit here. So you have this practice in Arizona, and then you mentioned a couple times already the seminar business. So what were the classes that you were teaching? We run an education entity as well, so we put on some seminars in the rehab chiro branch or the industry for seminars. We do a lot of acupuncture and dry needling too, but what was your niche or what was your topic that you would teach in the seminar business?
So I got started off in that because of it was in documentation, but it started off mainly with range of motion measuring. And this was a weird story too. So I don't know, I don't know why or how, but I've been using functional outcome measures for about 30 years. I mean, before, I was at the very beginning of all that. I was using questionnaires. I wanted to measure range of motion, and I wanted to buy a particular piece of equipment that would measure range of motion for me. And I remember it was going to be about, I don't know, 7,000 bucks or so. And I'd spoken to the owner of the company a few times. And I said, yeah, I'm going to do that. And he goes, when you want to do that? I said, well, it was one of the things, well, I don't have the money right now. So I'm waiting for a PI case to settle.
Yeah, classic.
That was the only time we had any money. When a PI case would settle, then I have some money. And he goes, so he says, well, you know what? I'm talking to you. I like you. I trust you. So I'm going to send it to you now. And then as soon as you get money, send me the money. I'm like, the hell? Serious? I said, no, you don't have to do that. He goes, no, I want to. I'm like, who does that?
Right.
So he did it. And I'm like, and then I paid him very quickly for that. And I started using it like on everybody, not just a PI thing, on everybody. And I would tell him what my results were like and what I was seeing. And then in my small part-time office, there, which I was renting space from another chiropractor when they weren't there on those evenings, there was a group that had come into town that this is back in the early 2000s. And they'd come into town, they'd built this big thing up. And it was, they were doing private coaching and little seminars and stuff like that. And the chiropractor whose office I was renting space from must have hired them for private coaching. So I'm listening to them one evening doing stuff, and I'm like, this is exactly the stuff that I'm doing with this. So I ended up calling the owner of that company that I got the equipment from, and I told him about this, and I connected the two of them up together. And then this other company was going to be doing a seminar in Seattle like a month or so later, and they would get a lot of people there. But the guy talked to me and he goes, whenever we go to a new city, we like to have somebody in the audience who has been a client of ours so they can stand up and give a testimonial. I said, but we've never been to Seattle, so we don't have any clients there. But we understand that you do some of the stuff that we talked about. Would you consider giving a little testimonial? Just not on us, but just on,
Right.
what you,
On the product. Yep.
I said, yeah. I said, how long you want me to talk? And he's like, I don't know, 5 minutes or something. I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. So I fly out, I go to this thing, and there were probably about 100 people
Wow.
in the room. And the guy's talking, and I'm sitting kind of in the front row. And then he says, let me introduce you to, and he calls me up. And actually, I stayed right where I was. I didn't go up to the front. I just stayed right where I just stood up. And I started talking about stuff, but I started telling these stories, some of which were kind of funny. And everybody was just kind of cracking up at it. And the guy, the owner of this company, was looking at me like, and then afterwards, when I ended up doing about 20 minutes. I sit down and he says, come meet me at the break. So I go in the break and he said, I want to hire you. I said, I already have a job. He said, I want to hire you to speak and all these. And we talked about it. I only did 2 speaking events for him because some of the things that I had to work off of their slides and their material.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of things that I got to a slide and I read it and I'm like, oh, hell no. I said, that's not right. That's illegal. You can't do that. And so I stopped at that point. Well, then the guy that I originally talked with the range of motion stuff, he was like, man, you're really good at this. He said, how about we take this on the road? So
There you
he
go.
said, let me plan a seminar in Seattle just for you and see what we can do. Now, I never did PowerPoint before. I didn't know how to do, I didn't teach myself how to do PowerPoint. I didn't know if I had 20 minutes of material or 12 hours. I had no idea how to judge that. and I was going to do like 5 hours or something. Well, it worked out just perfectly for that. I'm like, wow, that was so much fun. I've been on stage for years. I'd been in Toastmasters for 20 years. I competed in speaking competitions. I was an actor earlier. I was a musician. So I was never afraid of a stage or an audience. I always enjoyed it. So I'm like, wow, that was fun. And that's kind of how it started. I started doing that. So I did it for other companies at first, and then it ended up just starting our own and just doing that. And now what's funny is I was traveling 85 to 100,000 miles a year doing seminars. I did
Wow.
that for years. That was a lot. And people like, how do you do? I said, well, I was only in my office very part-time.
Right.
So as soon as my kids would come home from school, I'd be home so that it didn't all fall on my wife and I could do stuff. But I'd be gone half the weekends of the year. That's how much I was traveling with that. And then when COVID hit, a a friend of mine who owned Chiro Credit, which is an online CE thing, and I've had some recorded stuff on his platform for years too. We become friends, and he called me when COVID started. He goes, "Hey, you all right?" I'm like, I literally said this out loud. I said, I just come back from a seminar in Florida, and I said, yeah, yeah, I'm fine. I said, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. That's what they told us,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
I said 2 weeks to flatten the curve. I said, my next seminar isn't until about 3 weeks, so I think I'm fine. So a week later, now things are getting worse, and he's like, "You all right?" And I'm like, "Another week, we should be fine." Calls me a week later, goes, "How about now?" I'm like, "Oh shit."
Yeah.
And he goes, "Okay, I have an idea." He said, "How about we shift your live seminars to online?" So he said, "You can still do them live, but from your computer,
That's right.
and we'll do that. We'll do it." I'm like, well, I mean, hell, we could try it. I mean,
Yeah.
who knows how long this is going to take? So we started doing that, and I was like, "Oh my god!" Now it wasn't the same as a live and
Right.
interactive audience,
Right.
but as far as getting the message out, I was having just as much attendance online as I was having live, but I didn't have to pay for airfare, didn't have to
Right.
pay for a hotel, no meals. It was so much more cost effective doing it that way.
Right.
I'm like, oh, geez. So I'm still doing that. I'm still doing these live webinars twice. In fact, I do them twice, 2 weekends a month. Although this month I'm doing one of them, I break it up into 4 Wednesdays. So I'm doing 3 hours this afternoon
Oh, wow.
for the next 3 Wednesdays. And I'm like, oh, so now people are like, "Hey, Greg, when are you going to start traveling again?" I'm like, yeah. Now I still do some live stuff. I do a lot of stuff with Parker. In fact, I'm going to Dallas next week to do a live stream webinar. And then I go back 2 weeks later for Parker Dallas. I do Parker Vegas. I did Parker Orlando. I do a lot of stuff with Parker, some webinars for them. And then I'll speak at some conventions. But other than that, I don't know that I see myself going to the trouble of, I do one in-person event in Arizona in November
Okay.
because I don't have to fly anywhere. But for me, flying to Cleveland and it cost me $2,000 for every seminar that I
Yeah.
did. And I'm like, so I'm like, I don't know. So I may just do more conventions like that where I'm paid to show up. I'm doing one in Michigan in April. So, I just get paid to show up. So I may do some of those, but yeah. So now when I travel, I went from being a somebody on American Airlines. I mean, I had a high status and I was flying first class all the time. "Oh, nice to see you again, Greg. Like a glass of wine?" Now I'm a nobody. I'm flying coach with everybody else. And it's horrible. It's embarrassing. What if people see me? What if they recognize? It's terrible.
I mean, it certainly is a trade-off because you get to sleep in your own bed, right? So
Yeah.
there's certainly some benefits to doing things from home.
Yeah.
But there's that sense of humor that I appreciate. So your topic is documentation. That's
I'm a
not
one-trick pony.
that's not a topic that people in the seminar industry go, here's where I want to specialize in the thing that people despise and struggle at the most, their documentation. So where did your training come from with documentation? How many hours did you have to like master this? You know, because that's an
Yeah,
animal, and there's regular, you know, there's you know all sorts of rules, and you know Medicare, all of that stuff get involved in documentation.
right.
So that's an animal. So tell me a little bit more about that.
So what's interesting is, nowadays you see people that teach this stuff with all these letters after their name, and they're a certified professional coder, and they're a certified this. I got none of that, because when I started doing this, that didn't exist.
That's funny.
There was
Yeah.
no such thing as
Yep.
that. It was a thing based on a one-off experience that I had. And I tell the story in my seminar and my webinars, that it was in the 90s. I had a personal injury case. Back then, some of the newer doctors give everyone a hard time. Oh, the travel card. I'm like, okay, back in the late 80s, early 90s, we had no computers. There was no such thing as a personal computer yet. And then even when they did come out, it took another few years for any kind of software to come out for that. So we all scribbled crap on travel cards, but nobody cared. Nobody ever looked at it,
Mm.
right? Even personal injury, we would treat the patient for whatever, and then we'd release them whenever we thought it was the proper time. And then the insurance company would ask for our bill, not the records, just the bill. So we sent the bill in and we got paid. 100% of it got paid. And the
100%.
patients, 100%, right? And these patients, we have an attorney. The attorney would always settle the case for at least 3 times the medical bills, sometimes more. Never based on the records. It was easy. And then one day I get this letter from an insurance company asking for the records. I'm like, what? So I call the adjuster. And I'm like, okay, I got this letter from you asking for my records. And she said, all right, do you have a question? I said, yeah. What records are you talking about? She said, that's stuff that you write down every visit. I said, oh, well, I mean, I could give that to you, but the problem is I wrote them and I don't know that I could read my own handwriting. I don't think you're going to be able to read them. And she said, that's okay. I'm going to send them anyway. I'm like, well, what are you looking for in these records of mine that you won't be able to read? And she said, we're looking for if you established medical necessity. Now, I remember when those words first came out. See, back in those days, okay, this is going to make you nauseous. There were many insurance policies around the country that for chiropractic care allowed for, are you ready? Unlimited visits. Unlimited. So we would have patients calling in to make an appointment, and we would start seeing them, and we would do whatever, adjustments, modalities, whatever we wanted. And these patients, and they had a $10 copay. It was ridiculous. They would come in forever.
Mm-hmm.
Every week they would come in. They're asymptomatic. They come in every week. They like to get adjusted, and we'd bill Blue Cross, and it was okay because it said unlimited visits.
Unlimited. That's right.
Right. And then one day it changed from unlimited visits to unlimited visits based on medical necessity. And we're like, what the hell is that? So we didn't know what that was. So we just kind of went along with it, but nobody knew what they meant by that, but they weren't checking it yet. So when she said, we want to see if you establish a medical necessity, I'm like, oh, okay, what is that? And she said, I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? If you don't know what it is, how will you know if I did it or not?
Right.
And she said, I'll know it when I see it. I'm like, oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding. Are you just going to make this up? And I thought, if this is a trend that's just beginning and I don't get ready for it, I'm screwed. And I was not thinking about anybody else. I'm thinking about me.
Right.
I got a big problem. So I said, I better figure this out. So I figured I need to learn everything I could about documentation. I thought it was going to be a 2-week thing. It'll take me 2 weeks. It took me 3 years.
Wow.
Imagine a 3-year documentation seminar. That's
Wow.
it. It was
So
awful.
where did you have to go to find the resources?
So I started with chiropractors, chiropractic colleges, chiropractic textbooks, and I quickly realized that was useless. They had no idea. So I went to the medical side and I read medical journals, medical textbooks. I went to some medical seminars. I spoke with medical office administrators. I spoke with hospital administrators. And I kept notes. At the end of 3 years, I looked at my notes and I'm like, oh, oh, I think I see what's going on now. Okay. So I started changing some of my procedures in my office to accommodate this. And it was magnificent,
Wow.
magnificent. I'm like, and then when the whole medical necessity thing, I'm like, yeah, so everybody else is, I'm like, I got this. And I remember I was interviewed. There was a consultant back then named Greg Stanley. He had a company called Whitehall Management. And he heard about me and my story and he wanted to interview me. So I go to his studio because he was in Arizona and he has a reel-to-reel tape recorder.
Oh, wow.
And he's recording. And I'm like, and first, this is how he starts. He said, look, I'm doing this as a favor to somebody else. Honestly, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know that anything you have to say has any relevance.
Wow.
I'm like, oh, okay. He said, and he would take a recording that he did and put him on a cassette tape. And then he would send that to his subscribers. So he said, so there's no guarantees that our interview today is going to end up on a tape. And maybe if there's a couple of minutes of useful stuff, maybe I'll put it with somebody else's. I'm like, all right, roll tape. So I starts rolling. I tell him the story, and suddenly he's like this. Wait, what? And I explain to him, and he goes, and at the end of it, he says, holy crap, Greg. He said, what you just talked about might be the missing link. He said, because we have over here what chiropractors are doing, and over here is what the rest of healthcare is wanting. And there's this huge gap, and we don't know how to get over that. He said, what you just talked about, he said, I think that might be the bridge to get. I'm like, so I was like, how do you like me now?
That's right.
And I got my own cassette tape.
There you go.
So that, and then I started. So it became, at first it was all about documentation. And then it started coming up with coding. I would get requests from state associations to speak at their convention. Hey, Greg, can you talk about coding? And I'm like, coding? I said, coding is nothing. I said, it's the documentation that's the most important. Coding, I could talk to you about coding in 15 minutes. There's only so many codes that we as chiropractors use. I could tell you to do that in 15 minutes. You want to know how the coding works with the documentation part.
That's right.
And the other problem is, there are not very many people that teach this.
That's right.
Now, there's just a few of us, and we know who each other are, and we all like. I was at Parker Vegas. I was speaking at Parker Vegas this past February, and there were a couple of other people I know in this space, and we all sat in on each other's classes. And they're like, "You're not going to heckle me, are you?" I'm like, "No, I might steal some of your material, though." Okay. So, but what's interesting is not everybody is a chiropractor, and not everybody still practices.
Right.
And I think that's part of the thing. Is it's one thing to tell you the rules, requirements, and all that on documentation coding. It's another thing to say, okay, but how do we actually do that?
That's right.
In an office while seeing patients. I don't have time for that. So that's what I do. I try to kind of narrate, okay, this is what we have to do. Now let's boil it down to this is how we can actually do it. And this is how I do it, because I still see patients a little bit, just about 6 or 8 hours a week is all, but I still see patients. I'm still in the game. I still get the same aggravation that everyone else gets. And I still have to deal with some of this stuff. And that's good for me. And it's good for everyone else because I'll figure it out. And when I figure it out, then I can tell everybody else, okay, here's what's going on. Just like when I would post on social media groups that you saw about a certain code, because I review records for insurance companies too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. They came to me. I didn't go to them. They came to me. And I've done that for a few years. And I I see this documentation. I'm like, you've got to, everything you do for a patient must be justified in your notes. There
That's
has
right.
to be a reason for it. And a lot of these chiropractors don't understand that. And then a lot of the software programs that these chiropractors use have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And they are creating a process for doctors to fail. And I'm like, and I feel bad because I'm like, the doctor thought they were doing the right thing. And I'm like, no, I said, this is on the verge of fraud right
Wow.
here. This is a,
So let me ask you this. You feel free to not answer this. I mean, this is,
okay.
what are some of the softwares that you would be apprehensive to encourage chiropractors to use if they're not actually set up for us to succeed if we use them?
Yeah. I don't want to name names.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that guy,
Yep.
but I'll tell you this. I'll tell you this. I ended up getting so frustrated that I created my own software. Had I found any of them that worked properly, I would not have had to have done that because they all would have been perfectly happy to pay me,
That's right.
right? In fact, one of the, let's just say, larger ones in the profession, the largest one that has bought up a number of other companies, I actually used them for a number of years. And I had communications with a previous CEO, and he wanted me to spend time creating macros for their program, for which they would pay me very well for that. I spent a year on it, a year.
Wow.
I finally told him, okay, I'm going to stop wasting my time now. I said, I can't do it because the way that it's programmed, I can make your program suck less than it does now, but it still sucks. I said, there's too much copying and pasting I got to do, and it's just a waste of time. I said, it's the way that it's programmed for that. And then he actually talked about having some kind of a licensing deal with me because I told him I'm just going to make my own kind of thing with that. And he wanted to do a licensing deal. Then that particular company had been sold, I think, twice in 3 years. And
Wow.
I started with them in 2006, and they were a very chiropractic friendly and driven company. Well, now they're owned by investment banks.
Wow.
It's not,
So
they don't give a shit about you.
well, I kind of gathered that, but it's helpful to hear like the inside baseball, it's helpful to hear
Yeah.
so what's your EHR, what's your system called?
So well, to back up a second. So
Okay.
all these, when I review these records, I see all these various software programs, and some of them I'm like, okay, I'm seeing this one come up. I need to find out which one this is because it's so awful. So I would then find out what it was, and then I would get a demo with it, and then I would listen to the salesperson give me their pitch, and they don't know who I am,
That's right.
and they don't know my knowledge, and they're telling me this stuff, and I'm like, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. I said, well, one time I said, well, that's wrong. Well, no, it's not, but it is. That's wrong. I said, but we have chiropractors on our, I said, if chiropractors knew how to document, that might be helpful, but they don't. So just because you've got a chiropractor in staff doesn't mean anything to me. I said, so then they said, well, could you tell us how to fix it? I'm like, sure. Let me tell you how much that's going to cost you.
Yep.
I'm not just going to give you that information.
That's right.
I said, you can hire me to consult, but it's going to be very expensive to do that. So anyway, I decided few years ago, I said, okay, I got it. This can be so much better. So I reverse engineered the whole process. I said, okay, what are the rules? What are the requirements? What do we have to do? Let's start there. And then let's work around it. But I'm also very efficiency driven. I don't like to handle the same piece of paper twice. I don't like to have to click on multiple things to get one sentence in there. Who's got time for that?
That's right.
So I found a programmer that I'd known for years but never met. but I've known this person for years. And I told this person, I said, hey, this is what I want to do. I need a programmer. And we talked about stuff. Would you be interested? Yeah, maybe. So I had to ask this person, I said, how do I don't know coding. I know documentation. Well, I don't know computer program coding. I
Right.
know
Right.
insurance coding. I
Yeah.
don't know
Yep.
that.
Yep.
I said, how do I communicate what I want to you? And she said, computer programming is a language. So the best way to do this is whatever you want to do, put it in terms of logic and numbers. That's computer programming. It's all about logic and numbers. So whatever you can do, and I said, oh, oh, okay. So everything I think about, I'm like, okay, how, first of this, is there a metric involved with this? And a lot of the documentation that I do and recommend that's actually required revolves around the use of certain metrics. Just a few, just certain metrics. I'm like, oh my gosh, we can, so we did that, and then we keep tweaking it and up. I'm like, oh my gosh. So it's called Bulletproof, and it's only for documentation. I didn't want to get into insurance billing and all that. There's plenty of programs out there for that. But then some doctors using Bulletproof would have to use it with some of these other programs for the billing and scheduling. So they're like, it'd be so nice if it, all right. So I was approached by another company in Florida last year, and they told me, they said, all right, we have an EHR, it's cloud-based, and it's great for everything except documentation. It's great for billing and scheduling and all that, but it sucks for documentation. We heard about your program,
Mhm.
and would you be interested in maybe linking the two up? And I said, well, I mean, we can talk about it. So we talked about it for a few months, and we said, you know what, let's do it. So I got my programmer and their programmers working on it, and that's what we're doing. So that's an option. So Bulletproof can be just for documentation and use your own billing thing if you want.
Okay.
Or if you do a lot of insurance billing, we're linked up with this billing company that uses a platform called Vericle. And we simply, so I have in Bulletproof all of the different ICD, the ICD-10 codes that are
Yep.
important for us, the CPT codes embedded into what we do. And then we simply hit a button and it uploads to them, and then they scrub it, make sure everything's okay, and then they follow up with everything. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I've been doing that for a few months now, even with my own patients.
Okay.
That's been fantastic. That's been great. So now I'm starting to get a few other companies. Hey, what about us? I'm like, well, I mean, maybe. I said, but it's got to be cost effective, So for that integration, it's really mostly that's cost effective for doctors that do a pretty fair amount of insurance billing, like at least a couple of $1,000s a month of insurance collections. If they're a cash practice, I don't know that would be a cost effective option. So then I have other doctors that are, not very much insurance. They'll use Bulletproof with one of these other less expensive platforms that they don't have to worry about the insurance and all that. So
Right.
yeah.
Oh, it's such a fascinating evolution of how you went from, one PI case to then
Right.
now having a full-blown EHR and
What BI case? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's kind of why we wanted to have you on was to just hear your story, and then learn more about you. Is there anything else like that you have, in irons in the fire? Is there anything else that you have going on?
Um, let's see. No, it's interesting. I'm always into opportunities. I love opportunities. So it's interesting to see what happens throughout the course of a year. I would get phone calls from, or somebody will be in a seminar of mine or a webinar. I don't know who's there. Like I was doing an in-person seminar speaking at Parker Orlando in June of this year. And I spoke for like 10 hours that
Wow.
weekend, not on one day, but over a few days. And one of the days I was doing like 3 hours in one day. And there was a guy in the room who was wearing a very nice suit, which is unusual for chiropractors. And he was sitting in the very front. And I'm thinking, I don't know who this guy is or why he's wearing a suit. But he was there for 3 hours. At the end of it all, that's when he introduces himself to me. And it was the president of NCMIC.
Wow.
And he's like, Greg, that was great. He says, help me help you.
Yeah.
What can I do for you? I'm like, well, I don't know. So we talked about stuff like that.
And we
I
do
do.
just, I just want to interrupt you for a second. We do have non-chiropractors that listen. So let me just back up a step and say NCMIC is the country's largest malpractice insurer
Oh
for
yeah,
chiropractors. So I just want to clarify that. So this is a
thank you.
big, this
Yeah,
is a big deal. Yeah, yeah.
that was
So
a
very,
big deal with that.
yeah.
So yeah, so interesting stuff like that happens every now and then, and I'm always excited for that. But I'm also happy to just kind of do my thing, and I clean the pool on Mondays. That's pool cleaning day, and I bought a banjo, learned how to play the banjo in my off time. So it's just fun to be able to do this, and it's fun to be able to meet people like you that do these podcasts, and who I have no idea who listens or watches these podcasts, and it's fun. It was funny because I was interviewed recently on a podcast, and I try to keep my language clean on these podcasts, and it's like people that know me know that that's not my natural language. That my natural language is very salty with that, but I try to rein it in on to be professional. And I'm on this other podcast a few weeks ago, and the one interviewing me drops the F bomb, and I'm like, "Are we
Okay.
allowed to say that?"
Yeah, here we go now.
And I was liberated. He said, "Just say what's on your heart." I'm like, "The shackles are off." So those are fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not me. Where I'm not very salty. As
Yeah.
I'm very sarcastic, but you won't. I mean, maybe once in a blue moon you'll catch an F-bomb from me, but
Well, if I
it's
if
still
I
still
dropped some today, I apologize if they
no.
slipped out.
You're good. You're good. We'll just, like I said, we'll have to just make sure we put an E. Make sure. But I should have said earlier, but we have a healthy mixture of chiropractors, physical therapists, strength coaches, massage therapists, and then like sports specific coaches. So there's soccer coaches, baseball coaches, lacrosse coaches that listen to us. And it's really it's a leadership podcast, but really it's like this. It's learning more about specific people, how they got to where they're at, and some of the takeaways that I've gotten from interviewing people over the last couple of years has been in so many words. It's been that they do things, they see an opportunity, and they just go for it. You, a long time ago, I don't know if you caught yourself or you even picked up on what you said. Like you weren't complacent with just having an idea. You went out and you did something, whether it was putting 1,000 business cards in the hands of people to drum up your chiropractic business, or creating an EHR that was actually beneficial to our profession. The do matters. That's something that we say in our office regularly, is that you can say all the right things, you can know all of the knowledge, but if you don't use it, or you don't do if you don't do it, then
Yeah,
it's really irrelevant.
totally. So it's interesting you said that a number of the people that listen and watch these podcasts are in the sports realm like that. So a little bit more background. So I was in, I believe it was the first batch of chiropractors to do it was in the first uh, certified chiropractic sports physician program
Oh yeah.
in the country. It was in 1987. And then,
I wasn't even born yet.
yeah, thanks for that. And then, and then passed the test 1980. So I have this diploma from that in my office from 1988. So I've been that for many years. And then for sports stuff that I did, I remember one of the funniest ones I was doing. I had a friend from chiropractic college who lives in LA. And for many years, I don't know if he's still there, but for many years, he was the chiropractor for USC,
Wow.
University of Southern California.
Yeah, yeah.
So he would have all these athletes. So whenever one of his athletes was in Arizona, and they needed somebody, he would have them contact me. So that was interesting. So somehow I got hooked up with the AVP, which was the
Oh yeah.
early days of professional beach volleyball, right? I mean, the early
Yeah.
days. of this. And they would come into Arizona and do these and have these sand volleyball tournaments. So I got invited to do that with another guy that was very well versed. A chiropractor was very well versed in that. So he kind of helped train me with that. But what was funny when I first saw these guys playing beach volleyball, I don't know if you know much. I don't know if you follow beach volleyball at all, but it was the superstars of the sport
Yeah.
back then. Here's some. I'll drop a couple of names I don't remember. St. John Smith was like the father of pro beach volleyball. Randy Stokely, those guys, and every guy. I'm looking at all these guys. I'm like, is there like a rule that you've got to be at least 6'4" and a model to play pro beach volleyball? Because I mean, these guys were beautiful. I'm like, that's the weirdest thing I've ever. I mean, but we were getting it back on. I mean, they kept jacking up their shoulders or their
Oh yeah.
knees, and we're like doing stuff and getting it back on the. I mean, it was interesting. And then I got to do the women's pro beach volleyball one time. One time, and that one, I want you all to Google this name. All right, the superstar of the women's pro beach volleyball tour back then. Google her. Her name is Gabriella Reese. Just Google that and you'll thank me later for that. She's married to an extreme surfer, Rand Laird, I think his name is. And I remember I had to work on her. I'm like, oh my gosh. So there have been times where I've gone to like the Arizona Diamondbacks
Yeah.
clubhouse.
Yeah.
I got called there to work on a picture over Labor Day one time. And the trainer said, I think he's got a rib out. And I said, I looked at the guy was from Dominican Republic, doesn't speak any English. And I took my thumb and I poked it in. I said, dolor aquí, pain here. And he goes, "Ay." So I'm
See.
like, all right, I can fix that. I can fix that in 1 second. So I laid him down, adjusted that rib area. I'm like, okay, do a throwing motion. He's like, oh, like, so it didn't require any rehab or things like that, but it was one of those quick little jolts that we would do. And then other people have asked me over the years, how is it working on, have you worked on professional athletes? Yes. How is that? Not as cool as you would think sometimes.
Yeah.
Some of them are really nice. Some of them think the whole world owes them and they think that their insurance is going to be just the best in the world. And it's not oftentimes. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Sometimes some of the league insurance policies are some of the worst.
Yeah. I'm like, you've got an $80 copay. Well, I'm not paying that. Talk to me. I'm like, what? Yeah. So one time, here's last story. I was on my way to teach an in-person seminar in my own state, in Scottsdale, Arizona. I do it every November, and I don't need my car there all the time. So for no reason, my wife is driving me to the hotel. My cell phone rings. I pick it up. Hello, and it was a woman that said, "Hi, Dr. Friedman. My name is so and so, and I'm in town with a soccer player, and she hurt herself." And blah, blah, blah going on. Now, I get these phone calls every now and then. It's usually a 15-year-old club soccer player or some kind of teenager who's in town for some tournament. They heard that, whatever. And that's what I think this is. So I'm like, oh, she really hurt herself. She can't play. Can you come over and help? And I'm like, I said, hey, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm on my way to teach a seminar. But it's really important. And I'm like, so I said, I mean, I would, but I mean, if you can wait till like later today or no, we have a game tonight. We have a game tonight against Sweden. I'm like, Sweden? Wait a minute. This is not a 15-year-old club soccer player. I'm like, so I'm thinking, okay, what's going on in the sports world in Phoenix tonight? I'm like, wait a minute. Are you talking about the United States World Cup women's soccer team? And she said, yes. And it's our superstar player, and she can't freaking move, and she has to play. I'm like, okay. Different conversation now.
Yeah.
I said,
I think I can make that work.
I said, all right, here's the thing. I said, I can't leave. I'm going to this venue. If you could bring her to the hotel where I am right now, I can have a table brought over to me and I can get some other stuff and I can treat her. However, It's going to be on a stage, and my seminar doesn't start until 1 o'clock, but there's going to be people showing up early. So there'll be no privacy. Is you okay with that? That's fine. That's fine. I said, okay, have her come to this, bring her to this address and so on. So I said, could you tell me her name? So she tells me her name, and I didn't know women's soccer at the time. So my wife, we hang up the phone. My wife says, what was that about? So I explained to her. I said, she goes, well, who's a soccer player? I'm like, I don't know. So I'm like Googling, and I'm like, Abby. And it was, she's retired now, but it was the superstar
Yeah.
player.
Multiple World Cup champion. Yep.
Yes, what I'm talking about.
Yep. Yep.
So when I met her, I'm like, she's like hobbling in. I'm like, okay, I don't know. I said, my goal is to get you just to play. I don't know how good you're going to be. She goes, I don't need to be good. I at least need to be a decoy. I'm like, oh, that's clever. She goes, they don't know that I'm in pain, right? The other team. I need to be a decoy. I'm like, all right. So there I was. I did a history. I examined her. I adjusted her. I did extra spinal adjustments. I had a cold laser brought over, my cold laser brought over, just laser on her. And by the time I was done with her, she was like, okay, I can move. And she played. And she was a decoy.
That's right.
And I think we won. And then as a thank you, because I knew they're not paying me.
Right.
But the cool thing is, she gave me a soccer ball from the U.S. Women's World Cup thing.
Yeah.
And it was signed by every member
Oh, wow.
of the team like that. So I have this soccer ball signed by the U.S. World Cup women's team in my office in a plexiglass box. And every now and then, I just have it there. Every now and then, the patient will come in and they'll see that and they'll say, oh, did your daughter play soccer? And I'll say, well, she did, but that's not from that. And then I explain the story and they're like, holy crap. And I'm like, yeah, that was my soccer story with that. So that was kind of cool. So anyway, so sports, I never went out looking for that. Right. But it was very interesting. One time in also before you were born, probably 1989.
I was born in 88. So yeah.
Okay, guys, are a year old.
Yeah, I was a year old.
So I went to this was with a new organization called FIX, Federation Internationale of Chiropractic Sportifs.
Yeah.
FICS.
Yep.
Well, they've been around now for 30 years, but this was like the first year.
Yeah.
And I went on a trip with them, a few chiropractors, to Moscow in 1989. And it was a sports medicine conference that we were going to in Moscow, Russia. And we were talking with some of the Russian doctors and all that. And we went through a tour of their facility. And it was funny because half the doors were locked and they were not allowed to show us those rooms.
I believe it.
But myself and one other guy from Baltimore, we were kind of a little bit edgy enough that we kept checking the doors. And one of them was unlocked and we took a peek in, and that's where some interesting stuff was going on. That's where we saw them using lights and special glasses with different colored lenses. We're like, what the hell? And it turns out that was all part of the Russian process with these athletes. Wow. It was fascinating. But what was really cool, the hotel that we were staying in was built for the 1980 Olympic Games in Moscow, which the US had boycotted for political reasons. Right. For that. But that's where we're staying. So when we get to the hotel, we have to give them our passports. And they told us ahead of time, they're going to go through your room every day, looking at But the cool thing is there were other national teams staying at that hotel while we were there. Okay. And we were trading with them at night. So we brought a bunch of blue jeans and Nikes and Sony Walkmans because they couldn't get those in these other countries. And we're trading this stuff with them when they're giving us stuff. It was the coolest thing. So that was my fun sports medicine story.
Well, I think a lot of people are interested in sports and they like the idea of working with athletes. And I don't think they understand how just genuine organic relationships get you to where you want to go. They think that they just become a sports medicine or they do, chiropractic rehab. And it's like, this is the people I want to work with, but they don't actually they don't recognize maybe opportunities right in front of them, and maybe they even force the issue. It's kind of like what you mentioned earlier with the networking. People can sniff that out in a hot second. If you walk in and you're thinking, what can I do? What can you guys do
Right.
for me? But if you walk into a situation where you're like, hey, I'm just here to help, you'd be surprised at how many people will take you up on that offer. It's just simply because you're there to try to help solve a problem for them. And some of that is an extra set of eyes or peace of mind. There's a school that we work with closely at our office in the Chicagoland area. They're short staffed with athletic trainers. They know that they are, and so we just kind of have a professional understanding that anything that's spinal, they want a second set of eyes on. And so that's where we come in. Their problem was we don't trust ourselves to evaluate the spine properly. And we said,
Right.
great, we'll solve that for you.
We'll do it.
I didn't say I want to treat your athletes. I want to come in. I want to do this, this, and this. I just said,
Right.
what problem are you dealing with right now? How could I help? Then that cultivated a working 5-year relationship with that. And now we see everyone, but in the beginning, if we had just said, here's what we want to help you,
Right.
by
Yeah.
treating all of your athletes, they're like, okay, yeah, we'll let you know when we need you. And
You
that's
know,
never.
even at the high school level, it's not always easy to get in
That's right.
to those teams because invariably somebody's father on the team is an orthopedist.
Yep.
So for years we ran into that obstacle with that, which was rather interesting. I remember when I adjusted that pitcher for the Diamondbacks years ago, afterwards the trainer called, I didn't get paid for that one either. But the trainer did say, he said, "Hey, Greg, if you ever want baseball tickets, call me. I'm at will call." I didn't want to abuse that. So
Right.
I think I called him one time
Yeah.
for tickets for that. But he actually called me like a day or two later and he goes, "Hey, that really helped him. And he really liked you. And he wants to see you again. In fact, he told one of our other pitchers about you and he wants to see you too." And I'm like, I, I said, "That's great. Thank you. But there's already a chiropractor for the team. And I don't want to step on
Yeah.
the guy just happened to be out of town that weekend. I don't want to step on his toes for that." "No, no, that's okay. These guys can go to whoever they want with that." And I'm like, "Well, I mean, okay, let me know." Well, unfortunately for me, both of those pitchers were traded like 2 days later. And that was that
Classic.
was
Yep.
that was the end of it. But that was my brush with fame for
Well, I could listen to your stories for hours, if not days. So, where can our listeners learn more about you, especially your resources that you have online? Tell us a little bit more how we can get in touch with you.
Sure. So let's see. I've got a couple of websites. I have one website for my webinars and seminars, and that is www.gotdocumentation.com. So it's Got Documentation Seminars. That's G like George, O, T like Tango, documentation.com. And you can see there different things about me, the schedule of my events for the rest of the year, doing that. And then for my software, that website is www.thebulletproofchiro.com. That's T like Tango, H like Henry, E like Echo, the bulletproof Chiro, CHIRO.com. You can email me at both of those, either Dr. Gregg, which is spelled DRGREGG. So 2 G's at the end. I call that a Gregg mullet. 1 G at the front, 2 G's at the back, and now you'll never forget how to spell my name.
That's right.
So Dr. Gregg at Got Documentation or Dr. Gregg at thebulletproofchiro.com, whichever you want. And those are the easiest ways to get a hold of me. And sometimes, and I get doctors DMing me through Facebook a lot, and they'll do that. And some doctors will want to talk to me on the phone, and I'll tell them, I said, well, it's easier for both of us if you could ask me your questions in an email so I can think about it and then respond. Otherwise, we're dealing with time differences,
Yeah.
unless it's a legal issue.
Yeah.
If it's illegal, so I had one guy I said, "Stop, don't say another word. This has to be done on the phone because I don't want there to be a paper trail of anything that we discuss," until I said, "If this becomes legal, you need to have an attorney retain me." And then it's all work product and do that.
Yeah.
So if it's that kind of a thing, I've had a few phone calls with doctors, which we're happy to do. And some guys just don't want to do an email. They just want to talk, and that's
Yeah.
fine. We'll schedule that.
Yeah,
And that's always interesting. I like doing that. I've had people say, "Could I come to your office and shadow you?" I'm like, "Dude, I'm in my office like 6 hours a week. I just see a few patients. I don't know how exciting that's going to be for you, and I don't know that I do the things that you're going to want to do
that's right.
like that." So I said, I mean, I do some weird stuff on some people. So I mean, you're welcome to come by, and they do, and it's fun. And we talked about other stuff as well, and then we had lunch, and that's fun. So I'm always, I'm at that point in my life and my career that I'm in the legacy building mode
Yeah.
where I want to make sure that by the whenever it is that I leave, I've left the profession and the people with whom I interact better off than when I got here. So, however, I could be a resource or um, you know a blessing to others with that, I'm happy to do that. And I'm not trying to sell anybody stuff. If somebody wants to buy my software, that's fine, but that's not a requirement for me to talk to you or email, and I'm happy to do that.
Brilliant. Well, as I mentioned when we started, you're a wealth of knowledge. Your heart's in the right place, and you're helping. I could tell you're helping a lot of people. If for nothing other than giving them the confidence to succeed with their documentation, which again is like if you just put up a forum or a survey of chiropractors, what's the number one thing you need help with? Documentation. 9 times out of 10 is the thing that chiropractors say
Yeah.
that they need help with.
What's the number one thing you hate most about your practice?
That's it. Documentation. So we will make sure we include in the show notes all the links, all of the emails for you. Dr. Gregg, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us your timeless stories and just the process by which you've gone through your chiropractic career. Thank you so much for calling on.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Good meeting you.